my dream of a new Europe narrative is one in which people remember as well as think of the future. So part of that dream has to be, any dream can create this space where you feel nurtured, thriving, and fulfilled, okay? But part of a dream is also about things that have not gone well, or have created trauma, or have significantly shaped, in a negative way, an experience, an individual, a community, or a country, or the world. And so part of dreaming has to be able to understand where you've come from and what you do not want, but also to have the ability to fly a kite, have a sense of the art of the possible, and have a belief in humanity to be better than what it is and has been, but to be better, and a fundamental belief that people are born good. And what we need to do is enable to remember that and actually craft a future in which people, as individuals and as communities, drive a vision of interdependence, mutuality, a certain set of values to each other, a sense of connection, a sense of value to each other. But fundamentally, as we enter what will become in the next 20 years a significantly digital society, the capacity for us to become individually lonely and very isolated is high. Our dream has to be able to remember those elements that we've left behind, but to remember that actually fundamentally as humans, our ability to connect with each other, to love each other and support each other, have to be the drivers of that dream, despite the operating system and context of digital and or greed and or corruption and or power politics. And that dream has to be crafted in those terms.
So you say first element is a sort of wise advice. We have to remember and think about the future, because we have to remember what went wrong and implement it in our new design. We have to continue dreaming, and you said especially we have to make humanity better. And that's possible. We can craft people, we can use our vision, we can go more into mutual understanding, more focus on value. And you said that's above all important because of the digitalization, which has its threat of going into more loneliness, disconnection, and so on. And we can maintain a strong world, a human dream of love, of respect and support, despite greed and the digital threat. Can you elaborate on that?
The digital revolution is a force for good and a force for bad. It has enabled generations to connect with each other in a way they never imagined. So an 8-year-old grandmother in India can FaceTime her grandchildren in London, and so on, China, Africa, etc. That ability to connect has been profound. The poorest people in the world have access to a smartphone, which has enabled them to access healthcare, access payments, understand the world better, have access to education. It's a source of good insofar as being able to tackle climate change, improve our security, and enhance our economic capacity as individuals. The flip side of it, which is the force for bad, is that, like anything, it's a process and it's a tool, and it can have it easily adopts our worst traits as humans in terms of greed, in terms of achieving power, our egos, etc. And so what we have seen is the operation of digital as a harmful tool that can destroy democracies, create different perceptions of society and identity. It's able to sway economies by a flick of a switch. It can shut down a city within a day. Hackers can get into bank accounts, into stopping systems working. And there's a malevolence to the system. And I think that what we need to do is be aware of that, because what we tend to be doing is repeating the behaviors that we've always had into a system which has the greatest capacity to transform ourselves into a good place. But what it's doing is we're repeating some of our negative behaviors into the system, hence the use of algorithms. And I think algorithms is a really interesting element of the future of DNA of society. It's almost understanding all our patterns of behavior, building that data into something which will then either enable us to move down a road this way because it understands and gives us messages, or it shifts us to another way. And I think that's the most harmful thing about how the modern DNA of society, which is the algorithm, has the capacity to do a lot of harm. And I think globally, internationally, we need to be able to create a form of governance and regulation, which I think ought to be circular and not the classic other model. Because fundamentally, when a child has harmed herself because she's seen images of herself that she did not choose to put on the internet, and or kills herself, affects a family, a community, and a society, and suddenly there's a wake-up call. Nobody wants to be bad. So actually, if you use that example and that experience to forge a sense of accountability and ownership for change, rather than simply leaving it to politicians, that's how you use and create a dream, by actually using those negative examples and experiences to forge something different. Last week, what do we see on our images across Europe and globally? The Vice Chancellor of Austria engaging in some of the most depraved activity of moral reprehensible behavior as a politician that had no care for citizens of Austria, abused his power, and was prepared to do deals, i.e. the ugly part of human nature. Now, we've seen examples of that can be written to a system, as we saw in Austria. And him and his party were able to paint a picture of society that did not take any lessons from the past, but basically attempted to go for a pure Austrian model, a flick back to the past as a basis to improve ourselves. And these are examples, and others which are about, how Cambridge Analytica for Brexit, for example, are elements which do us so much more harm than good, but our capacity to join those experiences and think about life and society into the future different is what's missing. And I think by power sharing and working in this more shareholder model and using adversity of experience to harness a sense of hope, an opportunity to make things better.
We have to realize that there are a lot of, next to the good things of digital, the bad things are even worse, what you mentioned till now, because the good things are, of course, the connection and the Facebook and all the children and the access in Africa of mobile education, which is a very strong point. But the bad side, the flip side is very strong, because we have like shut down cities, banking, corruption, drugs, whatever. And but the worst thing of all is that it can penetrate in our behavior, and it even, which is very important that you said, that it can enhance our worst habits in the system, because that's the way the system apparently works. And that is what we always did for bad things. It will even continue that into algorithms. And the algorithm can be a big danger for our society. And as an example, you can see that kids get so addicted that they commit suicide because of their face, which is not connected to the face of the universal model. And that is such dramatic things that we should be aware of this capacity, that we can do that wrongly. And we have to have hope to use this for the good of improving humanity. So how can we improve humanity? That's my last question.
It's a very big question.
Yeah.
And let me start by answering with what I believe we have a significant deficit of, and that is ideas, ideologies, and leadership. We have entered this 21st century without individuals that vision differently and better for a future that can be not the same as it always been, but fundamentally different. We are missing those great thinkers that actually questioned it doesn't have to be like this. And they work tirelessly to mobilize communities and individuals to create a better world. Now, one might say that was a symptom of the evolution of society, whether that's to do with our relationship to race and black people, women and their vote, the advent of, let's say, or the response to colonialism, whether it's Gandhi. So you've got Mandela, Gandhi, and the suffragettes, and a range of others, who worked tirelessly to think differently about a society that could be against society that was for them. And so we've evolved and we've progressed. And when we think about the early part of last century, if you think about it ideologically, we're at a crossroads around individuals and men that viewed communities as either being pure and of a certain race, and those who were against that and wanted to see that differently. And it took a significant crime for us to be jolted out of our complacency to think the world should be different, can be different, and hence we move forward. But in that time, certain ideologies were crafted, built on the past 300 years, about the relationship between state, market, and the role of citizen, and various forms of contracts, and therefore, a government should be big and look after people. The private sector should excel and therefore create economic growth. And then we've had mutations of that in the past 80 years. And we are now fundamentally seeking questions to, can capitalism function in the way that it always has? When you have progression in the world where we live longer, we are more educated, we have greater life expectancy in different ways in different parts of the world. We are seeing China, Russia becoming much more influential in the next 10 years, as well as Africa developing. A very different set of community is growing up. And what we miss is, and perhaps we need to change our mindset, and perhaps what we don't need is the great, strong leader with the idea. How do we craft communities of movement, or movement of communities, that actually serve as those ideas, change-shaping modalities for us to move forward? And perhaps that's one of the things I'm reflecting on it as I'm speaking to you, is that we're caught in the mindset psychologically of wishing to have superheroes.
Yeah.
I mean, this century has been the success of Marvel, let's not forget. And I think this says a lot, in that every time, you have someone in a situation, in a system, so Macron becomes a superhero as a savior for Europe. But, that dream whittles away very quickly. And you see that, Obama, a superhero, worshipped as being, the savior of our society, and so on and so forth. And so we're stuck in this dynamic of seeking heroes, not many heroines, as our route out.
Yeah.
And I think what we need psychologically in this century is that we're not going to have that kind of leader dynamic. And that's why I think the route out of this is power sharing and thinking about communities of movement, and not foisting, and we can't help ourselves. So a 15-year-old child becomes a proxy for our psychological default in not dealing with climate, and she becomes this heroine globally. Yet we don't reflect on ourselves in terms of what we could do differently and behave differently, and actually not castigate, as I've heard so many times, children being out of school on a Friday, but actually value it and say, actually, how do we come around and build support below that and create new forms of community movement and change? And I think that's what needs to happen. That's what we're missing in this early part of the century.
Okay. thank you. Well, you started with we have to go for leadership and new ideas, and then you gave some examples of Gandhi and Mandela and the suffragettes, and then you realized step by step that okay, that was very great changes, but we are stuck in a sort of systems, and part of this stuck is that we also stuck in the idea that we need the superheroes. That's what you realized while saying this. And maybe this is a narrative that we should leave because we saw Obama failing, because we saw Macron failing in very short notice. So we should direct our mindset in a complete different way. And that is, again, supporting your proposal for power sharing. Well, thank you very much
Thank you.
for your thinking exercise.